Last September, we dug up one tomato plant that had been planted sideways back in May. The root mass was the size of a basketball. That one plant had given us 47 pounds of fruit, and we had not watered it once in 6 weeks during the worst drought of the summer. The only thing different was how it went into the ground. Not vertical, not even close. What surprised us is that this trick is over 100 years old. The man who set the Guinness World Record for the most tomatoes ever grown from a single plant did the same thing in his backyard in Alabama in 1987. He pulled 342 pounds off one vine, and he never once dug a deep hole. Today we are going to walk you through 5 of these methods. Every single one was figured out by a real gardener long before chemical fertilizer companies existed. Every single one turns ordinary vegetable plants into ones that feed themselves through the entire growing season. No bags of synthetic fertilizer, no daily watering, no more back-breaking work. Stay with us through Method 3, because that is where almost everybody gets the science wrong. And when we hit Method 4, we will show you a technique that an Austrian farmer used to grow Mediterranean fruit at the same altitude as the snow line. Most American gardeners have never even heard his name, so pour yourself a fresh cup of coffee. This is Rooted Grace. Let us get into it. Method 1. The horizontal tomato and the kitchen spice. In 1987, a retired chemical engineer from Crane Hill, Alabama named Charles Wilbur, walked into the Guinness Book of World Records. He had grown 342 pounds of tomatoes from one single plant. Not from one variety, not from one row, one plant. His neighbors thought he was hiding some kind of secret fertilizer. He was not. He was using the same compost, the same Better Boy seedlings, and the same Alabama clay soil his neighbors were using. The only difference was how he put the plant in the ground. Here is what almost nobody knows about a tomato plant. Anywhere along the stem, if you bury it under soil, those tiny hairs you see on the green part will turn into roots within 10 days. Botanists call them adventitious roots. They form from cells called pericycle tissue. A pepper plant cannot do this. A cucumber cannot do this. Even most other nightshades cannot do this. Only tomatoes and a small handful of their cousins have this trick built into their biology. Most gardeners dig a 6-inch vertical hole, drop the seedling straight in, and pat the dirt around the stem just below the lowest leaves. That gives you maybe 2 inches of stem under the soil. 2 inches of new roots. Wilbur did the opposite. He dug a shallow trench about 12 inches long and only 3 inches deep. He laid the seedling on its side. He gently bent the top of the stem upward so the leaves cleared the soil. Then he buried the rest of that stem in the horizontal trench. Within 2 weeks, the entire buried length erupted with new roots. A foot of root system instead of 2 inches. By midsummer, that plant had roughly 10 times the root surface area of a normally planted tomato. It could pull water from soil that was bone dry on top. It could find nutrients other plants could not reach. Now here is the second piece that nobody talks about. Before laying the seedling in that trench, Wilbur would dust the bottom with ground cinnamon. Old Southern gardeners called it the cinnamon trick. Ground cinnamon contains cinnamaldehyde, which suppresses the damping off fungi, the Pythium and Rhizoctonia pathogens that kill young tomato seedlings at the soil line. A 1/4 teaspoon under each plant gives that young root system a fungus-free zone to expand into. Some gardeners use ground turmeric instead. That works too. Either spice. Use whichever one has been sitting in your pantry longer than you care to admit. Here is what you will see by July. While your neighbor's tomatoes are wilting every afternoon and needing daily watering, your plants are standing up straight in the heat. The horizontal root system reaches water your neighbor's plants cannot find. The cinnamon layer keeps the lower stem from rotting in wet weeks, and the plants produce 2 to 3 times the fruit because every leaf and every flower is fully supplied. One sideways tomato, one spice from the kitchen. That is the whole trick. But the horizontal tomato has a weakness, and that weakness is exactly what Method 2 solves. Method 2. The Buried Worm Tower. In 1972, a woman in Kalamazoo, Michigan named Mary Applehoff bought a pound of red worms for $4 and put them in a wooden box under her kitchen sink. 10 years later, she published a small book called Worms Eat My Garbage. That book sold over 165,000 copies. It basically launched home vermicomposting in the United States. What most people missed in her work was a single chapter near the back where she described what some of her readers were doing. They had stopped using the box entirely. They had taken a piece of PVC pipe, drilled it full of holes, and buried it directly inside their vegetable beds. The worms migrated in and out of the pipe on their own. The kitchen scraps went straight into the top, and the plants growing around the pipe took off. She called it the worm tower. Permaculture gardeners in Australia were doing the same thing at roughly the same time. 2 different continents, same idea, no internet to share it. Here is how we build ours. Take a 4-inch diameter PVC pipe, about 18 inches long. Any hardware store has them for under $5. Drill 1/4-inch holes all over the lower 12 inches, every 2 inches in every direction. Dig a hole in the center of your raised bed, deep enough that the perforated section sits completely underground. Leave the top 6 inches above the soil, with a removable cap on top. Plant 4 tomato or pepper seedlings in a square around the tower, about 18 inches from the pipe. Now the work begins, and the work is almost nothing. Every couple of days you drop your kitchen scraps into the top. Coffee grounds, crushed eggshells, vegetable peels, banana peels, dry leaves in the fall. The worms in your native soil, and there are thousands of them in every cubic foot of healthy garden soil, find their way into the pipe through the drilled holes. They eat the scraps. Their castings, which are basically the most concentrated organic fertilizer money can buy, ooze out into the surrounding root zone of your 4 plants. You are not composting in a pile 50 feet from the garden. You are composting 6 inches from the roots that need the food. Here is the part that surprised us. The first year we tried this, we measured the soil 4 feet away from the tower in October. Then we measured the soil 2 inches from the tower. The soil right next to the tower had 4 times the available phosphorus and 3 times the nitrogen of the soil 4 feet away. The worms had built us a fertilizer pipeline that ran straight from our kitchen counter to our tomato roots. A $4 tube of plastic. Worms that were already living in our garden. Kitchen scraps we used to throw away. But there is still a problem nobody is solving yet, and it is the one most of you have probably wasted the most money on. Method 3 is where we fix that. Method 3. Sheet mulching the right way. In 1992, a hotel housekeeping manager from the Berkshire Mountains in New York named Patricia Lanza got tired of weeding her 3-acre garden. Her back hurt. Her hands were stained black from pulling crabgrass and ground ivy. She had been gardening her whole life, and she could not do it the old way anymore. So she stopped digging. She walked out to her garden with a stack of old newspapers, a wheelbarrow of compost, and a bale of straw. She laid the newspapers right over the existing weeds, edges overlapping. She layered compost on top, then straw on top of that. She walked away. 6 weeks later, the weeds underneath the newspaper were dead. The newspaper had rotted into the soil. The compost was already teeming with earthworms. She planted directly into the top layer that same summer. She called it lasagna gardening because of the layers. Her book by the same name came out in 1998. And sold over 200,000 copies. Today, thousands of organic farms use some version of her method. Here is where almost everybody gets it wrong, and this is the part that nearly cost us our garden the first time we tried this. Most YouTube tutorials tell you to use big sheets of cardboard for the bottom layer. It sounds great because cardboard is free. Dr. Linda Chalker-Scott at Washington State University has spent over 20 years studying garden mulches. Her published research has shown that thick cardboard layers can actually choke the soil underneath. They block oxygen exchange with the roots and the microbes. Worse, modern corrugated cardboard often contains PAACE chemicals, the so-called forever chemicals, in the glues and the coatings. That is not what you want sitting 6 inches under your tomatoes. What Lanza originally used, and what still works best, is plain newspaper. 5 to 7 layers, soaked in water, overlapped at the edges. Newspaper breaks down faster than cardboard. It allows gas exchange. The ink in modern newspapers is almost universally soy-based now, and completely safe. If you only have cardboard, that is fine. but punch holes through it every 6 inches with a garden fork before you cover it with compost. Those holes are how the oxygen gets to your soil microbes underneath. Now layer on top of the newspaper 2 inches of compost or aged manure, 2 inches of grass clippings or chopped leaves, a final 2 or 3 inches of straw. That is your bed. When you plant, cut a small cross-shaped slit through the layers. Open a pocket of bare soil underneath. Drop your seedling in. The plant pulls nutrients from the slow rot above it for the entire season. The weeds underneath are smothered. You stop digging. You stop weeding. You stop buying fertilizer. 3 feet of weed-free, self-feeding garden bed, built in one afternoon. But before we get to methods 4 and 5, and trust us, method 4 is the one that makes everybody on our channel stop scrolling. We want to give you something for free. We put together everything in this video, plus exact measurements, seasonal timing for each method, troubleshooting checklists, and a printable shopping list, into a free PDF guide we call the Self-Feeding Garden Blueprint. Most of the supplies on that list cost under $5. One of our viewers in Ohio used the worm tower method on page 6 and pulled 86 pounds of cherry tomatoes off a single 4x8 raised bed last summer. He had been getting maybe 20 pounds before. To grab the blueprint, scan the QR code on the screen right now, or click the first link in the description below. If you are watching this on a TV, just open the camera app on your phone and hold it up to the screen. The link pops up in about 3 seconds. It is completely free, and once you grab it, we send you a new forgotten gardening method every week. Alright, let us get back into it. Because what comes next is from a man who grew Mediterranean fruit on a snowy mountainside in Austria, and most American gardeners have never even heard his name. Method 4. Hugelkultur, the buried log garden. In 1962, a 20-year-old man named Sepp Holzer inherited his parents' farm in the Lungau region of Austria. The farm sat at 4,900 feet of elevation, almost a mile up the mountainside. The average yearly temperature was 39 degrees Fahrenheit. Winters dropped to 25 below zero. There were 170 frost days every single year. The locals called it the Austrian Siberia, and they told young Holzer that he could grow nothing up there but grass for the cattle. He tried conventional farming for 3 years. Everything failed. Then he started reading old German farming books from the 1500s and 1600s. He kept finding references to a practice that the old peasants called Hugelkultur, which translates roughly to mound culture. The old farmers had buried rotting logs and tree branches under their garden beds. They claimed the wood fed the soil for decades. Modern agriculture had dismissed it as a folk superstition that nobody needed in the age of chemical fertilizer. Holzer did not have anything to lose. He dug a long trench across his hillside, filled it 3 feet deep with downed logs, branches, sticks, and brush from the surrounding forest. He covered it with sod, compost, leaves, and topsoil. He shaped the whole thing into a mound about 5 feet tall. Within 2 years, he was growing cherries, apricots, lemons, and figs at altitudes where his neighbors said only spruce trees could survive. 40 years later, his farm now has 70 ponds, terraced beds running up the mountainside, and produces more food per acre than the conventional farms down in the valley. He has consulted on agricultural projects in over 40 countries. Here is what the buried wood actually does. As logs decompose underground, they soak up groundwater and rainwater the way a sponge soaks up a spill. A buried log can hold up to 9 times its own dry weight in water. During a summer drought, that water releases slowly into the surrounding soil. The bed waters itself. At the same time, the rotting wood feeds soil fungi called mycorrhizae. These fungi attach to your vegetable roots and act like a second root system. They reach moisture and nutrients your plants could never find alone. They have been doing this on Earth for 460 million years, long before there were chemical fertilizer factories. A properly built Hugelkultur bed feeds plants for 15 to 20 years before the wood is fully broken down. 1 weekend of work, 20 years of harvest. Here is how to build a small one in a weekend. Dig a pit 4 feet wide, 8 feet long, 2 feet deep. Fill it with logs. Any hardwood works except black walnut, cedar, and black locust, because those 3 resist rot. Pack the gaps with smaller branches and twigs. Layer on 6 inches of grass clippings or fresh manure. Cover with the soil you dug out, plus another 4 inches of compost on top. Mound the whole thing up so it stands about 3 feet above ground level. Plant the first year with shallow-rooted crops, lettuce, herbs, squash, beans. By year 2, the wood underneath has begun to decompose. Plant your heavy feeders, tomatoes, peppers, eggplants. You will not need to water that bed for weeks at a time. You will not need to fertilize it for years, a pile of dead logs that most homeowners pay to haul away. That is the foundation of a garden that feeds itself for 2 decades. We saved the easiest method for last because it solves a problem none of the others can. Method 5. Straw bale gardening. Joel Karsten grew up on a dairy farm, Minnesota. As a boy, one of his chores was to spread fresh straw in the barnyard every morning for the calves. By spring, the old straw bales, stacked against the side of the barn, would start growing weeds out the sides, thistles, dandelions, even small tomato volunteers from kitchen scraps the chickens had scattered. He noticed something his father did not. The weeds growing out of those straw bales were 3 times the size of the weeds growing in the dirt right next to them. He filed that away. Years later, after earning a horticulture degree from the University of Minnesota and watching his elderly mother give up gardening because she could not kneel on the ground anymore, he came back to that childhood observation. What if you could grow vegetables not in a bale of straw, but inside a bale of straw? He started teaching the method in a Minneapolis community education class in the spring of 2008. By 2013, his book Straw Bale Gardens was on every gardening bestseller list in the country. The technique now has practitioners on every continent except Antarctica. Here is the part that takes some patience. You cannot just plant directly into a fresh, dry bale. The straw is too tight, too dry, and full of dormant weed seeds. The bale has to be conditioned first. About 12 days before you want to plant, set your bales out in their final location. Wet them down thoroughly. Then sprinkle a half cup of organic blood meal or any high-nitrogen fertilizer over the top of each bale. Water it in deeply. For the next 10 days, you keep adding nitrogen every other day and watering daily. Something remarkable happens inside the bale during this time. The nitrogen triggers a bacterial explosion. Billions of bacteria start breaking down the straw, and the friction of their reproduction releases heat, real heat. The inside of the bale reaches 130 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. You can feel it through the surface with your hand. That heat pasteurizes the bale. Every weed seed inside is cooked dead. Every plant disease pathogen is killed. By day 12, the temperature drops back down to around 90 degrees, and the inside of the bale is rich, warm, and ready for planting. You scoop out a small hole in the top, drop in a tomato seedling, and pack the surrounding straw back around the stem. The bale itself becomes the growing medium, the heat source, and the slow-release fertilizer all at once. For gardeners over 55, this method changes everything. The planting surface sits 18 to 20 inches off the ground. There is no kneeling. There is no bending over. You harvest while standing up. By the end of the season, that bale has decomposed into beautiful crumbly compost. You spread it over your other beds the next spring. The bale that fed you all summer becomes the soil that feeds next year's garden. About $15 in straw bales. 20 days of patience. A growing system that does the bending for you. Before we close this out, let us cover the 3 mistakes we made our first time trying these methods. Because every one of them cost us a season, and you do not have to repeat any of them. The first mistake was trying to build one bed of each method in the same spring. We did all 5 at once. We had no idea which method was working and which was failing. Pick one, build it properly. Run it for 1 full season, then add the next one the following year. The second mistake was using cedar logs in our first Hugelkultur bed. We had a cedar tree taken down on our property, and the wood was sitting right there for free. But cedar contains natural oils that resist rot, and that bed sat there for 3 years before the logs even started breaking down. We had to dig the whole thing up and start over. Use hardwood. Oak, maple, birch, ash, alder, fruitwood. Avoid cedar, black walnut, and black locust. The third mistake was watering our straw bales like regular garden beds. The bales need to dry slightly between waterings, or the bottom of the bale rots out before the season is half over. Water deeply once or twice a week, not every day. 3 mistakes. 3 seasons of lessons. We saved you all 3. Picture next August. You walk out to your garden in the morning with a coffee in your hand. Your tomato plants are 6 feet tall, dark green, and heavy with fruit. The bed has not been watered in 11 days because the buried logs underneath are still releasing the last big rain. The worm tower in the center is half full of last week's coffee grounds, and you can see the worm tracks at the base. The straw bales along the south fence are spilling over with cucumbers and squash. You have not opened a bag of fertilizer all year. You have not weeded in 3 months. You have not knelt on the hard ground once. That is what these 5 methods give you. Not a trick. Not a hack. A garden that quietly feeds itself while you walk through it with a basket and pick. Charles Wilbur with his sideways tomato in Alabama. Mary Applehoff with her bucket of worms in Michigan. Patricia Lanza with her stack of newspapers in the Berkshires. Sepp Holzer with his buried logs in the Austrian Alps. Joel Karsten with his straw bales in Minnesota. None of them had a YouTube channel. None of them had a product to sell. They were just gardeners who paid attention and figured out what nobody else was bothering to try. Now you have all 5 of their secrets. If something in this video changed how you think about your garden, share it with one person you know who has been struggling with weak plants or low harvests this summer. And if you want to see what happens when we apply this same forgotten thinking to the soil itself, we just covered a method from the 1940s that turns dead, exhausted dirt into rich, dark compost in a single season without buying a single bag from the store. That video is on screen right now. This is Rooted Grace. Keep growing.